digital newsletter Wine Speed. And this is the Great Italian Classics, wonderful wines from Piedmont, Tuscany, and the Veneto. And today, our live virtual tasting is with Barbara Widmer, who is the winemaker and owner of Brancaia Estate in Tuscany. Thank you all for being here. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you've joined us before, we're glad you're back. We remind you that you'll be able to ask questions throughout this session, and we will try and take as many of them as we can. So welcome, Barbara. It's late in Tuscany. It must be, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night there.
It is 11 o'clock. That's right. Hi, Karen. And hi, everybody.
Good for you for being with us. You know, before we talk about your wines, and I had mentioned to you earlier that I'm so excited because I've never tasted 4 Brancaia wines all together, and that's what we're going to do today, your 4 top wines. But before we talk about the wines, I want to talk a little bit about you and your family, because I think of this as sort of like a dream story. Your parents, about 30 years ago, your whole family is from Switzerland. Your parents go to Tuscany to visit. They fall in love with Tuscany, and who doesn't? But they buy an estate, then they go home and they install you as the winemaker of this beautiful Tuscan estate. This is truly a dream come true. That's amazing. You must feel very lucky.
Well, I do, but let's say it's my parents' dream, and sometimes it's my nightmare, but that's okay. No, I feel very blessed that I had the chance to start to do wines in Tuscany. Tuscany is, as you just mentioned, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful landscape, beautiful people, great food, and you really can make outstanding wines, and not just once a while, but every year. If you do really understand the land, the nature, it's a perfect spot. It's beautiful, and I do now the wines for Brancaia more than 22 years, and I still feel a lot of energy, and very blessed that I can do it.
Yeah, you know, I was teasing you a little bit there, but and I want to say that I know that you are a very serious winemaker. Your background originally, though, was in art and architecture. And I'm wondering if you feel that wine is an extension of art, and that like art, there's a lot of intuition and creativity involved.
Well, winemaking, especially if you want to make wine on the very high end, it's very personal, because most important decision we do take are stomach or heart decision. So if you take them perfectly well, it could become art. But I personally always prefer that other people to decide if it's well done, and not me.
Yeah. I know you studied winemaking in Switzerland, your native home. And I wonder, sometimes in northern Italy, I feel as if the winemakers can sometimes have either a German or an Austrian or a Swiss, those are countries bordering Italy in the north, a kind of point of view in terms of making wine that is really precise and very exact and very pure. I'm wondering if you think your Swiss heritage is an asset in making wine.
Well, you know, it's always nice to believe that your background is an asset. So, of course, I do hope it is. I do hope that I can actually mix my Swiss background, and I'm still very Swiss, okay? And I always will be. So being a bit more precise I do see as a help, but seeing also things with more passion and also probably more on the easy side is also a really good and an important thing in my daily life. So I would be in difficulty to judge or to choose between the two countries. I feel at least half Italian.
Well, it sounds like a perfect combination. So let's talk about Brancaia. You know, when I see the word, the last letters, Aya, I understand that that means place of in local dialect. So tell us about the name Brancaia, but also the estate, because it's not just one estate. You've got three important properties, right?
Well, Brancaia for us today, it's a combination of three different spots. So today we do have two wineries in the Chianti Classico region, so between Florence and Siena. And we have a third estate at the south coast from Tuscany, what we call Maremma. But everything started with the first estate my parents purchased in 1980. This estate was in, or is still in, the region of the Chianti Classico. And the name of the estate and the name of the hill was Brancaia. And as I just mentioned, Brancaia was, or from the Etruscan, they used it as an ending for houses and hills. So the first part of the word had always a meaning to the people they lived at the place. And unfortunately, I have to say, we don't know the real meaning of Branc, but there was definitely a meaning for the people they lived there. But yeah, it's the name of the hill and the first house my parents purchased. We fall in love also with the name, so we started to use this name for our wine, for our first wine. And we never stopped. So all our wines do have the same main name, Brancaia, and then they just have some sub names, like the first wine we'll taste, which does have the sub name Trip.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how these wines are categorized before we taste them, because Italy, God love it, it can be really confusing. You know, the Italians, I always think, love to invent rules, and then they like to not abide by them and then create new rules. And so one of the wines we're going to taste, the second wine, is a Chianti Classico Reserva. But the three other wines, and we know what that means, as you were saying, Classico, from the heart of the Chianti region, the historic heart, in my opinion, the best of the Chiantis. But the other three wines are Rosso Toscana, Tuscan red wine. And I guess I want to say that early on, I suppose we in the United States began to think about all of those wines as under this general name, Super Tuscan. Would you categorize, do you think of your other two wines, are there three wines in that way? Are all other three wines Super Tuscans?
Well, the first wine we will taste, which is actually the one just in front of me with the yellow label, I probably, if you want to speak in terms with Super Tuscan, I probably would call him more like a baby Super Tuscan, and not the Super Tuscan. Super Tuscan for me has to be really very powerful, very full, and you will see afterwards when you'll taste the wine, it is a beautiful wine. It offers a lot of things, but it doesn't have that much power as let's say number 3 and number 4 we'll taste tonight. So in terms of Super Tuscan, I would go with baby Super Tuscan for this. But as you just mentioned, especially the Chianti Classico region changed their rules many times in the last 40 years. And just to make it very short, a Chianti Classico was always a blend. It was a blend of red and white grapes. And then in the 90s, they started to allow that it was not anymore a must to have white grapes in the Chianti Classico, okay? So before mid-90s, if you wanted to get rid of the white grapes, it was not the Chianti Classico anymore. And then the white grapes were still allowed until 2003 or 4, I'm not really totally sure. They forbidden the white grapes. So today, if you would like to add white grapes, it wouldn't be a Chianti Classico anymore. And just a few years later, they allowed to produce 100% Sangiovese and still call it Chianti Classico. So what was always a blended wine can be today 100% Sangiovese. So things are changing, and I have to say that a lot of those changes were very positive, but of course it can be also very confusing. And in this evolution, there were a few wineries, let's say also quite a lot of wineries. They wanted to move forward a little bit faster than the Consortium of Chianti Classico, and they started to stop using white grapes before the Consortium of Chianti Classico agreed to not using any more white grapes. So their wines were probably even more interesting than the Chianti Classico, but they didn't fit anymore in the rules. So they were declassed to, at the beginning of the 80s, it was a table wine, and then they created this IGT, so these super Toscans. But it's an evolution, and we are still part of thinking that it's not totally important to have a Sangiovese, it's just important to have a great wine. So whatever matures perfectly well on our terroir is what we want to do.
Right.
It can be Sangiovese, but it could be also another grape.
Well, and there's the idea. In fact, as I'm going to suggest an idea, let's taste your tray, which is the first wine that we're going to taste. And I'm going to hold the label up here so everyone can see. The word tray means three, I think, right? And that's because this comes from all three of your parcels, the two in Chianti Classico and the one in the Maremma. I always think of the Maremma as being like Malibu is to Los Angeles, right? It's the coast, it's the beach, it's where everybody wants to go to have a holiday, but it's also where some pretty spectacular vineyards are. And this tray combines grapes grown in Chianti and grapes grown in the Maremma. I almost said Malibu. You're not making wine in Malibu yet, though? Not that I know of. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's a blend of those three estates, and it's also a blend of the three grapes, Sangiovese, Merlot, and Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a wine which matures for 12 months. It's about 2/3 of the wine matures in tonneaux, so small wooden barrels, and 1/3 in concrete, which helps to keep a certain freshness in this wine. And a very important thing at Roncaille is we don't have a wine which is a cuvée from one single block. So we dream and believe that each single block from our vineyards can achieve the top quality of our portfolio. And then only when we do pick the grape, we do start to accept reality. And of course, reality is not always our top wine. So it's you really have, even if it's a baby Super Tuscan, you already have a full body wine, a nice structure, nice tannins, nice flavors. It really fills your mouth, and it offers you a lot.
Mm. You know, what I was going to say earlier is in my experience, well, first of all, in addition to Sangiovese, as you point out, this has Merlot and Cabernet, and Merlot does surprisingly well in Tuscany. It's astounding to me. But Merlot and Cabernet, both of them take on, I don't know how to say this, but just a Tuscan flavor. They don't seem like Napa Valley Merlot or Cabernet at all. There's a real Tuscan savoriness, I guess I would say.
There from my point of view, there are at least two very important points here. We all our grapes do mature by dry farming. Okay, and dry farming means that the roots really go into the deepness, and they will suffer. And the big difference is that they will suffer in a way that they will crave flavors which are typical for spot. So you won't have only the food flavors, but you will have also flavors which are just typical for where they will grow, and that's what we're really looking for. So it's not, let's say, just a Merlot or just a Cabernet or some Sangiovese. No, it's really a fruit which can mature in this typical way just at our spot. That doesn't really make it different. No, it makes it different, but it doesn't really make it better than the neighbor's one, but it makes it different. And that's exactly what we try to do at Brancaia.
Mm. We have a question coming in, Barbara, from Elizabeth asking how far your Chianti estate is from Florence. I think there's a visitor who wants to come in the future.
Okay, well, isn't you're always welcome. I'm very, very bad in miles, but in kilometers, it's like not even 50 kilometers. So that's like by car, it's like half an hour, 40 minutes.
Perfect. Half an hour, 40 minutes.
Siena
I wish I could come right now.
Siena is a little bit closer, like 20 minutes.
Yes.
So we are really in between of Florence and Siena.
So one of the things that I really like about this tray is it is, as you say, it's a very structured wine and it's very mouth-filling, but it's not at all heavy. And it has really, as so many Italian wines do, it has a good sense of acidity. And I just, I think that's the miracle behind so many fabulous Italian food and wine pairings, is that the wines are so fresh and even the reds have such good acidity that they splice through the flavor of almost any kind of food you put with them. I'm assuming you think of this as a kind of every night dinner wine.
Absolutely. I mean, Karen, we Europeans, we always need food, okay? We hardly ever drink a glass of wine without food. It doesn't really have to be fancy. It's also just nice to have some Parmesan or ham or whatever. But we love wine with food. So that's actually what we try to do. We really want to have a perfect balanced wine, which should be elegant, and especially the tray. In summer, you even can drink it a bit cooler. It doesn't really harm anything if you have it before in the fridge. It will warm in your glass anyhow. So do it, and that won't be a shame at all.
I have to say, mine is a little bit cool and it's delicious. I think my cellar's turned down and now it's very cool. But I have to share with you that when I was a young journalist learning about wine, on my very first wine trip to Italy, the person who was taking me around was Italian and who would, just break out into opera at any moment. But he said to me when we arrived, there's one thing you must understand about Italians, and I'm going to tell you one thing, and it will really crystallize this for you. He said, when an Italian drinks too much, they don't say he's drunk too much. They say he hasn't eaten enough food yet.
That's nice. That's a good one.
I think that's right, though. I mean, my experience has been, yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's move to, that tray is completely delicious. I love, as I was saying, the savoriness of it. But it reminds me almost of like tapenade or black olives and herbs and a kind of outdoorsy, earthy flavor. But I want to move to your Chianti Classico Reserva. Of course, everyone pretty much knows Chianti Classico. Just remind us what Reserva means, though.
So, as you just mentioned, the wine we had before was a mix of grapes from the Chianti Classico region and the South Coast. And the Reserva is, of course, a wine which is sourced only from grapes from the Chianti Classico region, so between Florence and Siena. And Reserva means that the wine will mature at least 24 months in the cellar before you start to sell it. So right now we have the Chianti Classico Nata, which you can start to sell after 12 months, and the Reserva you could start to sell after 24 months. Mm-hmm. We actually go a bit further. So our wine matures quite a bit longer. This one is 80% Sangiovese 20 Merlot. So we do add the maximum what we can add regularly to the Sangiovese, and the wine will mature for 16 months in small barrels. The Sangiovese in Tonneau is a 500 liters, so still a very small barrel. But if you compare it with the classical barrique, it's a bit more than double. And the Merlot instead will mature in a barrique. So you have the fruit flavors, but they are extremely well integrated. It's not like it's overwhelming the wood flavors. You really have those red fruit flavors, those cherry flavors, and also probably some balsamico.
That's an interesting idea. I love that note of balsamic in a wine. It's something that is there and you don't always notice it until someone says that. And then you're like, oh yes, there it is. A really complex note of acidity. Very beautiful.
Yeah, it gets in your nose. And what I do like very much in this wine, that you have the same flavors you already have in the nose, you will refine in your mouth. And you remain for quite a while. So from a let's say medium body wine, we just went now to a real nice structured wine which remains for pretty long in your mouth. Then you're already quite mature, but it's still a baby wine. So you still, that's a wine you really can keep for quite a while in your cellar. I mean, 15 was an excellent vintage. There was not much thing you could do wrong. So, but I'm still extremely happy about this product. And it was a warm vintage, but nevertheless, that it was warm, you have a very nice freshness in this wine.
One of the things that I always, I actually wish I was better at art. You're the art person here, but if I were going to draw this wine, you know, Sangiovese can be a little bony, a little thin. Thin is the wrong word, but just angular. And then you have the kind of fleshiness of the Merlot filling it out. It makes it a very complete wine. When I taste wine like this, I'm not surprised that you and other winemakers find Merlot and Sangiovese to just really create a great integration together. Terrific.
I think this is a perfect mariage. It's really, you have all in the nose, all the Sangiovese flavors. When you have the wine in your mouth, you will start really with the Sangiovese. It's straightforward, already quite big, not too big, but you will have the very smooth and soft ending of the Merlot, which just makes it very pleasant.
Yeah, absolutely delicious. Well, I want to say for me, you know, you could have Chianti, but I would always go for Chianti Classico. You could have Chianti Classico, but again, I would take that next step and always have Chianti Classico Reserva. I think for all of our viewers, if you just remember those three words, you are, you know, you're covered then. You're in good territory. And in good territory, both in terms of structure, but also in terms of richness and in terms of freshness. Just a beautiful wine. Yeah. Let's go to the Ilatraia. I hope I've said that correctly, pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you do.
Pretty close anyway, for someone who doesn't speak Italian. Although my Italian improves when I'm in Italy drinking wine. I assure you. When I come to visit, Barbara, my Italian will be a lot better.
That's I can't wait.
Now, this wine is so surprising to me because when I was reading about it, there's a lot of Petit Verdot in this wine. And for our viewers who maybe don't know Petit Verdot, there is nothing petite about it. It is intensely colored, intensely flavored, so intense that most winemakers only use little bits. I mean, in Bordeaux, you would use much less than 10% usually. This wine is 40%, 40, Petit Verdot, which is one of the highest percentages I've ever even seen. I can't wait to taste it. But why so much Petit Verdot?
Well, there are
or maybe you could say why not, I guess. But
there are a few reasons. When I was 20, I had the chance in Spain to taste the first time in my life a poor Petit Verdot. And it was love at first sip. It was so powerful, but at the same time, it had a nice acidity, a nice structure. So it was like, wow, that's just outstanding. Of course, I was totally aware that in the Chianti Classico region, you can't mature Petit Verdot. Okay, so it's not warm enough. Probably in 10 years once it will mature nicely, but not every year. So there was no idea of growing Petit Verdot, but when we purchased our estate in the Maremma, where we are just next to the sea, it was like, okay, that could be a good spot for Petit Verdot. So we started to plant Petit Verdot. And today, after more than 20 years, we have to say that that was a great decision, because the Petit Verdot at our spot matures just extremely well. It's Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc. They do feel totally at home at our estate in the Maremma, and they can achieve a ripeness in an absolutely outstanding way. And as you mentioned before, that the Merlot we are producing in the Chianti Classico region is not as the Merlot in Napa. I'm totally convinced that this is a wine which is somehow a Bordeaux blend, but it's so typical Maremma, it's so typical Tuscany. It does have is the identity. I truly believe if you can achieve a perfect ripeness in a spot, it's just, it does get its identity. And then, of course, we do a lot of special work in the fields, and of course also in the cellar. All our wines since more than 12 years are spontaneous fermentation. So we really get the yeast from our vineyards into the cellar, which just gives, again, authenticity, typicity to our wines.
Yes, and many people, of course, would consider using indigenous yeast a very important part of a wine's integrity and naturalness. Barbara, we have a question coming in saying that this person is saying some of their friends think they don't like Italian wine, but then when this person pours them some Ilatraia, they realize they were wrong and they really fall in love with it. And then asking why is the appreciation of Tuscan wines in the United States not greater? I don't know that it's not so great. I mean, look at every Italian restaurant, but maybe people don't think about just on a nightly basis having a great Italian wine. What do you think?
I don't know, honestly, if of course not right now, but normally when I travel around the world, I have to say that I do think that Italian wines do have a great ambassador with the Italian kitchen, because everybody loves Italian food. In most places, there are Italian restaurants. We have a beautiful country, we have beautiful landscape, great culture, great history. So I honestly, I do think that as an Italian, and especially as a Tuscan wine producer, we have already, let's say, a lot of benefits, not only doing great wines, but also because we are living in one of the most beautiful landscapes and cultures. And I mean, it's like everybody needs to do once in his life a safari. I do have most of people who have the dream to go once in lifetime to Tuscany. So I always had the idea that being a Tuscan wine producer is a plus and not nothing negative. So, but of course, you know, living in another wine country, but that's true for Napa Valley, that's true for wherever you are probably more focused on your own wines, and then at the second step, you are seeking for tasting some other flavors from other countries or from other regions.
You know, we have a lot of comments coming in, Barbara, saying, we miss you, come back to the States, we love your wine. I just want you to know that lots of supporters are writing in right now. I want to offer one thought to the anonymous viewer who just talked about Tuscan wine in the United States. And I would say that one thing that Tuscan wine teaches us is a love of what I call noble bitterness. You know, the Americans have when you say the word bitter, we think bad things. But if you think about Italy, there are so many good bitters, right? There's espresso and arugula and radicchio and amaros. And it really is a country that understands this concept of, well, anyway, I call it noble bitterness, good bitterness. And I think when you have an Italian dish with a lot of good olive oil, not basic olive oil, but really good olive oil, you come to this appreciation of this sense of good bitterness in wine and how complex that idea is. But as a country, I think we Americans are only beginning to understand that. We understand minerality, we understand acidity, we certainly understand richness. Bitterness is next. It's a good thing, though. So I would say, I would have, if you handed me your Ilatreia, Traia or Traia? Traia, Ilatreia, right?
Yeah.
Traia, okay. All right, I've got to get that right.
I do know the meaning, okay? We do have a small hill on our property with the name Ilatreia since more than 400 years. And again, Aya, of course, is just a true landing for the hill. But Ila comes from a small bush, which his name is Ilatrio. And this hill was probably once covered with this small bush. Today, we do have one of our most exciting Petit Verdot on this hill.
How cool. So we have a question coming in from Sam, who's asking on Facebook, actually, at this moment, where you would put your winemaking in terms of tradition and modernity. Where would you say you are, Barbara?
Sam, that's a good question. I think it's a mix of both, okay? I love to use, of course, all new techniques. In all our vineyards, we have computers which do measure the weather, which do measure sun hours, rain hours, wind, humidity in air, humidity in the soil, which helps us a lot to reduce the treatments because we are able to treat at the best possible moment. Of course, our tanks, they are temperature controlled and, you know, everything, let's say, very clean. We do measure everything, but at the same time, the most important decision or heart decision or stomach decision, okay, when we do pick grapes, that's the moment I just walk through the vineyards every day. I do taste the grapes every day. And at a certain point, I do have the feeling, okay, that's the right moment. Each step in the cellar during the fermentation, during the maturation is just retasting and having our feeling and thinking, okay, the next thing what we have to do is this. Analyses are good, they are helpful, but they won't give you enough ideas what you do have to do. So it's very personal. It will change with life. I'm definitely not the same person I was 22 years ago. If I'm better or not as good as I was, I don't know, but I'm changing. And of course, we always do hope that we do improve. So it's learning by doing, and it's each year will be different. It's also a very important thing about winemaking. It's not science because every year is different. Nature is a big part of what we are doing. It needs knowledge, but it also needs a little bit of luck.
So beautifully said. Mm. Thank you for that. That was really beautifully said. Let's go to your Il Bleu. That was said with a French accent, I think. Here it is. Let's see if I can, there we go. And you see the blue label there. This is the 2015 vintage. And this wine is primarily Merlot, I believe, right? It's about 70% Merlot. So let's give it a try. And please tell us, we've referenced this a couple of times thus far, but what exactly, how do you describe Merlot, your Merlot, within the context of Tuscany?
Well, first of all, I have to say that we moved from the Ilatraia, from the south coast of Tuscany, we moved back with the Ilulu to the Chianti Classico region, okay? Ilatraia was a Super Tuscan, or IGT as you want to call it, and Ilulu again. But the Ilatraia is all grapes are from the south coast, and Ilulu, all grapes are from the Chianti Classico region. It's not the Chianti Classico because the blend, as you mentioned, 70% Merlot, 25 Sangiovese, 5 Cabernet Sauvignon can't be a Chianti Classico. From our point of view, the Merlot matures extremely well in the Chianti Classico region. Especially we have two spots in the Chianti Classico. We have a spot in Rodin Chianti and in Castellina Chianti. And the difference in our case is the sea level. Okay, in the Rodai state we are higher, so it's a little bit cooler, a little bit more windy, and it just the Merlot, which is a grape which matures quite early, can mature a little bit too fast at the coast and still in the Chianti Classico in Castellina, but it needs quite a while in Roda. So we really can achieve this elegance. So it's not just full and ripe, but there is, as you mentioned before, we love acidity, okay? We need always acidity in our wines. There is no way without. And with the Merlot, you do risk most to lose a little bit, and in Rodin County there is no risk, so there is always this slight freshness in it. Of course, also in 2015 it's still a baby, so you can keep it easily for quite a while in your cellar, but I think it already shows right now its beauty.
Oh, totally. And for all of our viewers who are listening in and watching in, Castellina and Rada and Chianti are communes within the little areas within the Chianti Classico. So we haven't moved to a different area. We've telescoped down to spots within the Chianti Classico. You know, I want to challenge people who are watching who may either love Merlot or think they don't like Merlot, actually, to taste this wine, because this is an expression of Merlot unlike the stereotypical version of Merlot. It's more structured, it's sleeker, it's more complex, it's got more layers of flavor. It's not just a kind of fat thing on your palate. It is really beautifully defined and, dare I say, a little salty, which I love, a kind of expression of minerality. No actual salt in it, of course, but just that kind of edgy spark of saltiness or minerality. Just wonderful.
I actually would like to mention that this label, the blue label, was designed by my father in 1988, so quite many years ago. And in 88, my parents decided that they wanted to do their first Super Tuscan, and they used the new wine a little bit as an excuse to create the new label. And we do have a beautiful house in Tuscany, but it's not the castle. Of course, we didn't have any background in winemaking, but my father was an owner of an advertising agency in Zurich. So he used his professional background to create something which was at that time totally new, and for most of my parents' friends, even very shocking. It was just not a wine label at that time. And of course, after you have seen, all our labels are today the same. So we loved it in '88, and we still love this label.
Oh, yeah, completely fantastic. And we're getting some questions about where people can find the Brancaia wines in the US, and they're well distributed, but you can also just go on, for example, vivino.com, and you'll be able to buy them there. And I would offer that it might be fun to get one of each of these four and replicate this tasting yourself, because you'll see a real interesting progression of the wines, not a progression in terms of quality, but a progression in terms of how to think about these different varieties, how to think about a Petit Verdot dominant wine versus a Merlot dominant wine, versus a very traditional Chianti Classico Reserva, versus the Tre and every night. I like your term, baby super Tuscan. Great term. So Barbara, tell me about when you taste this Il Bleu, how do you describe it? If you were just in a restaurant and someone said, I'm thinking about ordering this, I understand you're the winemaker, what does it taste like? What would you say?
Personally, I always try to not say too many things, because I love that people can have their own approach. But for me, Il Bleu from our whole portfolio is the most elegant wine. It does have a lot of blueberries, ripe fruit, not ripe, okay. There are blueberries, prune. There are, of course, also some wood flavors, but very well integrated, so it's never dominated. You will have some spiciness, and of course there is, especially if you compare it with Ilatraia, a very clear freshness. It's a wine which can age very, very long, but we always try when we do launch a wine that it already offers you a drinking pleasure. So even if 2015 is young, in your glass you have already whatever you're looking for. It remains in your mouth for minutes. Have me a sip, so.
Yeah.
You will have, it starts already pretty large. You have a certain sweetness in the mouth, prune, I would say. And then, of course, it will dry out a little bit, because, of course, the tannins are still very young. But there again, that's why we always have wine, okay? Why we don't drink any wine only with some food, because with the food, the dryness you will have right now will totally appear. Just a little piece of bread or cheese. And then, I mean, I still have all the flavors. There are those blueberries, there are some herbs, dry herbs. Yeah, it's...
You know it when you taste it, right? I mean, I have the same reaction, that it's hard sometimes to reduce a wine to just a kind of laundry list of flavors, even though I know I asked that question. But the idea that there are fruit components, herbal components, freshness components, and what might be called, let's see, earth, fruit, herbs, freshness, those things just kind of turn together in the same kaleidoscope in the context of a very rich wine. It's a very beautiful wine, and a lot of minerality as well, I would argue. So Barbara, we have a couple of other questions that I want to address. The first one coming in also from Facebook is a tough question a bit, but and I haven't really thought about this for other other wine areas around the world, but this year, the question is, this year, will the COVID situation affect your ability to hire workers to pick the grapes?
So far, it doesn't look like. It's true that we have, of course, as I guess everybody who's working in agriculture, we do have labor out, so it's not only our fixed team, but those people do live in Italy. So it's not that that people are coming from other countries extra for harvest. So they are already in Italy. They have, if they are not picking grapes, they will do in other parts of agriculture, they will do other work. So it doesn't really look today as this could be a problem.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. And of course, we're all thankful that wineries around the world, including here in the Napa Valley, wineries continue in production, even if their hospitality, the parts of the business that are dedicated to hospitality may be closed down. At least here in the U.S., I understand not the case in Italy, that you have been able
not
to.
Anymore, Karen, not anymore. We had a very tough lockdown in Italy, but since beginning of June, we are allowed again to have hosts. But I mean, our lockdown started in March. So we had a very long and a very tough lockdown, and Italy had probably the most tough lockdown in Europe. Yeah. People weren't even allowed to go outside of their house, just only for shopping. That was personally for me not a big issue, as I do live in the middle of our vineyards. But of course, for somebody who was living in a town, that was definitely very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, we are hoping that wine will, to some extent, sustain us all through this period. And though it's a very serious time, it's also a time to gather around with just the person who you live with, or the few people who you live with, and share a good bottle of wine. And I know I myself am very grateful. I've always been grateful for wine, but I'm especially grateful for wonderful wine right now. And so, Barbara, thank you for sharing your wines with us. They're really amazing wines. I'm so glad I got the chance to do the whole set of them together, because I had asked you about the idea of a bit of Swiss precision in these wines. I think I see it. I think I see that line of exactness and purity through all of these wines. Really a lovely, really lovely set. I don't know what I'm supposed to be having for dinner tonight, but I'm tempted to go into the pantry and grab a great box of linguine and take out the good olive oil. So I'm very, very grateful that you would stay up to talk with us. Thank you for these absolutely delicious wines.
Thank you for having me, Karen. That was great.
My pleasure. And to all of you viewers, thank you for joining us. I really can recommend that you check out Vivino or any other online retailer and get yourself a bottle or two of Brancaia. Pretty amazing wines. So for me, Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible, editor of Wine Speed, thank you for tonight and good night.
Cheers.